Hi there, this is a tutorial on how to make the drinking pots. For the theme of the drinking pots that I made, I chose animals, reptiles, flies, insects, whatever, because I thought it was easier to find things that related with each other. So for instance, this one's a frog and the watering dish is a fly. How these work is that you get these little tiny pots. You can get these anywhere, they're easy to find. And there are holes in the bottom of them. So you feed a piece of felt through the hole, which goes through your pot, and then it comes out of the mouth to act like a tongue, and then the tongue goes into the watering dish. And so what happens is the felt is going to absorb the water and feed your plant. So you shouldn't ever have to put water in the plant. You just make sure your watering dish has water in it. I got creative with my fly and I found a cord that was not working anymore, and so I tore it up and I took pieces of it and I bent them and I glued them into my fly after it was done. So I made certain that the holes were extra large, because if you remember the stages of clay and the properties of clay, that the piece will shrink when it's fired, when it's dried and then fired. So I made sure that I made these holes a little bit extra big so that these wires would fit in there. The eyes here, I ended up keeping very smooth. I didn't carve into any of them. I just carved into the eyelid a little bit up here, if you can see that. The eyelid I carved in, but I painted underglaze to make the eyeball the way that it is. And then I put little lines underneath the belly here, even though frogs don't really have lines underneath the belly like this, but it's just that little tiny detail that adds a lot to a piece. Craftsmanship is so incredibly important. Make sure that the areas that should be smooth are in fact smooth. Don't leave any crumbs or what we call boogers or burrs anywhere on your piece, especially the bottom. The bottom is just as much part of the piece as anything else. Like, if this needs to be very, very smooth, because if it sits on a surface and moves around, it's going to scratch and people aren't going to be very happy with that. So make sure that you are smoothing out the entire piece. The same goes for the inside. This inside is smooth. The piece is thin. It is not too thick. You don't want it too thick, because then you are going to risk it potentially cracking or exploding in the kiln. So make sure it's not too thick. You don't want any moisture in there. Also, where the mouth is, it's just as smooth in the inside as it is the outside. The other one that I made was a hedgehog. And so the hedgehog, when I looked up hedgehogs, people that have them as pets oftentimes give them, I guess, watermelon as a little tiny treat for them. They like it. So I made a little tiny watermelon for the watering dish. The carving of the actual hedgehog, I would say, or sculpting of the hedgehog, is probably a little bit more advanced than it was for the frog. The frog was much easier to do. It was because of these prickly things around. I like the way they turned out. Even though it kind of looks a little bit more like a moccasin shoe top, but I like the way it turned out, but it did take time and you had to be really, really patient to do it. But in the end, I like the way that these pricklies contrast the smooth face. Again, the bottom is very, very, very smooth. The shape, it's got a little pointed nose on the outside. Again, it's thin. It didn't get too thick where any of these pricklies were. The watermelon was super basic sculpting skills. It was pretty much making a pizza wedge with this thickness and then carving out very, very clean and neat the inside of it. This really relied on the glazing afterwards to make it a watermelon. Any of you can do this for certain, and I hope you do something more, this balances this, right? I have something very, very complicated with something very, very basic. Here, they're about equal. They both required about the same amount of skill, maybe a little bit more for the fly, only because it was smaller. But these are the pieces. These are the drinking pots. They're very, very cute when they're all finished. And I hope you have fun with this project. Take your time, pay attention to detail and craftsmanship, and you'll have these really, really cute little pieces. Have fun. pieces were fired. I glazed them, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how I finished these pieces. With the frog, what I ended up doing is I painted an undercoat of this darker green, and then I put some lighter greens on top for the spots. I gave it a finished low fire clear coat, which I had some issues with. If you can see here, it didn't go on very evenly. But you know, in the end, I really wasn't that upset about it. It just gave a little texture, I guess. But that was how I ended up finishing this piece. The fly was a little bit different. I did carve in some lines for these wings, and then what I did was I filled in the cracks of it with black, and I wiped it away with a sponge. I used a white clay, so this is just the white clay showing through. I ended up using for the body a low fire Amico glaze. I can't remember which one I used. I think it was Chun Plum I ended up using for the body, and same with the eyes. I think it was that one. I can't remember for sure. But anyways, I used a low fire glaze for the eyes, and then I kept the underglaze. I didn't put any clear coat. I wanted a matte finished for the face just to help give a little bit more contrast to the piece. And I did not glaze the inside of any of these. I take it back. I put underglaze in the inside of this one, but I probably should have put a clear coat because this is where the water is going to go, and so now it's going to probably absorb into the clay a little bit. So I may go back and fire the inside with a clear coat for the watering dish just so it doesn't absorb. But the inside here, I didn't do that. For the hedgehog, this is just an underglaze, 2 different color underglazes that I used. Underglaze. That's all that this was, with 2 coats of clear glaze over it to give it that shiny finish to it. And that was how that one was done. This one was also just a variety of underglazes that I built up. And this one I did put a clear in the inside, so the water should be just fine. I didn't clear coat the bottom for obvious reasons, so I could fire it without it sticking. But and that's kind of how I finished these pieces. I think that it turned out well. You can, if you want to, you could just use acrylic paint. These are not going to be used for food or anything like that. So if you wanted to use acrylic paint, you could have done that as well and put a coat of Mod Podge or something like that on it to help protect it from the water. And that would all have worked just fine. So you do what works well for you and what you have access to, and finish your pieces up. They're so cute. Thanks for watching.